welcome Charles, Esche, Oren, Sagiv, and for the first time in the center of Eilat. So, please.
So thanks, Eilat, for asking us to come here. It's a really nice opportunity to speak in the middle of a process. And actually our two colleagues, Pablo and Nuri are doing exactly the same thing in Madrid at the moment. So it's an interesting sort of test for both of us about what this Bienal is going to be about. I thought what we do is talk really about three core topics, and then we'll sort of expand on that and try and have a conversation between us. One is a bit about the history and how that has developed our thinking about the Bienal, so the history of São Paulo Bienal itself, and obviously that shapes a lot of what you think and even what is possible, and maybe to say a little bit about what it means to curate a Bienal, to come in from the outside and have a short time to try and shape it. The second thing is to look at the methodology that we've been working at so far, so what the kind of processes we've been involved in, and particularly what those processes have been in Brazil, given that we're all from outside of the country. And indeed it's the first time that people from outside of Latin America, only the second time that somebody outside of Brazil has been asked to do the Bienal. So it's in a sense quite a big step and a very big risk for them, I think, to ask us to do it. And the third thing is we'll look at the architecture of the pavilion, which is I suppose the main given, if not Brazil and São Paulo are a sort of given which is inevitable, but the main given by the Bienal Foundation itself is this extraordinary, difficult building of Niemeyer. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how that has also determined our thinking. So I suppose in the end you'll get a sense of what in a way what the restrictions are of doing a Bienal, you know, the conditions, the parameters, the edges within which you try and shape something. So maybe I can start by saying that this is the 31st biennial in São Paulo, which means it's the second oldest Biennale, the oldest one being Venice. And it began in 1951, so just after the Second World War, and began at a time which some people say is currently re-emerging, began at a time when Brazil seemed to be the future in a certain way. The idea that Brazil as a country was the one that was going to define in architectural terms, perhaps in social terms, even in political terms, something of the world. And that history, of course, was completely cut by the military dictatorship, which came in the mid-1960s and went through more or less, you can argue about it, until the mid-1980s, which then sort of removed Brazil from the world map in a sense and produced it as an isolated territory within a series of fascist or near-fascist dictatorships in the whole of Latin America. So 51 goes back to this time of optimism, which is, in certain accounts of Brazil, has been re-emerging in the last years through the economic growth. But I think we'll say a little bit about that and what that actually means in terms of our perception. So 1951, it began very much in the tradition of the Venice Biennale itself, in that it was divided into national pavilions. So each country that wanted to participate had to pay for their participation and would then be able to take a small part in the Biennale. And in 1957 it moved to the building, which actually you can see here, and we'll talk more about it. The building which was built actually as an industrial museum, a museum for industry, which was designed in a park which Oscar Niemeyer, who's one of the key figures of Brazilian modernism, designed the whole park and designed a series of pavilions, of which this is the biggest one. Here you can see it again. And the Biennale has been based here since 1957. So you know, one of our first questions was, could we do it somewhere else and not in this building?
Like in Rio.
Like in Rio, yeah, exactly, or Recife. But the answer came no. That this was really the sort of the inevitable place where the Biennale itself would happen. And it's a monstrous building, but Oren will talk a lot more about it. But this was then opened in 1957. As I say, originally built as an industrial museum, that never happened. The Biennale was looking for a home after having had 3 iterations. And the 4th one came here. And since then it's been its home, and the foundation has established itself. The foundation was established basically by European immigrants, colonialists, we could call them to some extent. São Paulo is a very Italian-influenced city. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, there was huge Italian immigration. Italian was the language that was heard on the street in the early 19th century rather than Portuguese at a certain time. And it was the Italian and to some extent the Jewish immigration into São Paulo that wanted to retain a connection with the old country and the old culture. So the Biennale in its origin was about importing European modernism, remember, after the Second World War, so in some ways it was similar to Documenta. You could see that as sort of a correction in a way that the Documenta was. This was also a sense of bringing modernity, or modernism at least, into Brazil from the world and showing Brazil what is going on. So it was very much about an idea which I think a lot of countries have been engaged in, of sort of catching up on something that is happening elsewhere. You know, this idea of delayed modernity, or of the modern being something which is just out of reach and you need to bring in order to be fully of the moment. So the Brazilian aspect of that was essentially the Biennale itself. So you could maybe start to see that it was very much an elitist project. Now the social makeup of Brazil is something we could talk a lot about, but essentially the pattern that we've seen everywhere in the last 20 years of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer is more or less the standard pattern in which Brazil has operated for the last 300 years. So essentially this elite, which is relatively small, owning most of the means of production, and then a huge underclass. And some of the changes in Brazil have been changes to that underclass rather than to the elite recently in terms of economic development. But nevertheless, this event was largely for an elite, and I think it was also not, certainly in the 50s and onwards, it was not seen as needing to target an audience or a public beyond that elite. Yes, and so it was an elite organized event for an elite public. It was a sort of enclosed idea, essentially. And that's something which I think we'll talk about a little bit through education and through other programs that has gradually shifted in the Biennale. There have been other agendas coming in. But nevertheless, it's still run as a foundation, so as a private organization. And it's funded through nowadays what's a particular sponsorship law which was set up about 8 to 10 years ago. And this law allows a private company to offset to 100% the taxes that they pay on specific cultural projects. So the cultural projects are approved by the government, and then those cultural projects, the money goes into the cultural project from the private company rather than from the state itself. So it's a strange form of state subsidy because it's effectively tax money, but the tax money is determined by the company rather than by the state to be given to these organizations. Again, it's similar in some ways to the American system, but the 100% is unique to Brazil. I think in America it's about 80% or something like that. So you have this. This system means that we are subject to the whims of the CEOs of some of the companies who will support or not support the Biennale project. And also there's a whole process of lobbying and of creating, again, those CEOs of course are part of the elite, so again a kind of internal network in which the elite sponsor through their companies the Biennale itself. So in a sense they retain control through this mechanism. So it doesn't become nationalized, it doesn't become something which is subject to government control. It remains within the elite. Nevertheless, the money is effectively state money because it's a foregone taxes, and it's taxes which are lost. So these are the sort of ground rules that we're working with. We're working with that history, with the history from 1951, which was of national pavilions. We're working with this building, and we're working with that funding structure and that particular history of an elite project. I'm not going to go through the whole of the Biennales. Obviously, there have been various changes, and there were boycotts in the 70s during the military dictatorship. But nevertheless, the Biennale always happened, and a lot of countries participated. It was never abandoned. And obviously, we can maybe talk, if you're interested, about the growth of Biennales as it was the second one. It was also part of a development of Biennales which happened also in the 60s and 70s, often regional Biennales, which all sort of more or less crashed, from Paris to the Arab Biennale, which opened in Baghdad in 1974, I think. And there were different kinds of Biennales that opened. And then after 1989, the surge in Biennales, which we all know about now, and which has reached everywhere, including, of course, Israel, in the last years. So you have, so that's broadly the history that we're inheriting. And in 2006, something I think quite important happened. Slightly, the power of the national pavilions had been reducing since the mid-1980s, again around 89 or so. The power of the national pavilions in relationship to a curated show. Yeah? So this development, which hasn't happened really in Venice, but has happened in every other Biennale, of moving from the voice of nation states to the voice to a curatorial voice, collective or singular curatorial voice. It's something which has also happened gradually through the São Paulo Bienal. There's a particularly important one in 1998, curated by Pablo Herkenhoff, which is probably the one or one of the ones that we reference most in relationship to our own, because it tried to look at a particular idea of Brazil through this idea of anthropophagia, of cannibalism, which is this mythology that Brazil has at the core of the relationship between the Portuguese when they arrived and the indigenous. Is the idea that they discover cannibals, and that cannibalism is a completely standard thing that happens amongst the indigenous, amongst the what they still call the Indians. So this process of denationalization, if you like, of the Biennale, so taking away from the national pavilions, was completed by 2006 when Lisette Lagnado curated an exhibition where there were no national pavilions at all. And partly, of course, that also affects the background. It means that the Biennale itself is no longer so reliant on international funds, which fully support the pavilions. And so it's no longer possible for a country to simply dictate their choice of artists and therefore also to pay for it all. Yeah, and also, yeah, exactly. Some countries, the United States, for instance, would always have had a big pavilion, particularly when it felt like it was important to have a good relationship with Brazil, whereas Paraguay, which is only next door, would have perhaps no representation or relatively small representation, and of course most countries in Africa wouldn't be participating at all in that old model. So now there was a shift after 2006, which meant that the curatorial voice became much stronger in a certain way, but also various other things I think shifted at that point. It's still an elite project, I think, but it became conscious that there was a job of education to do. If we think about the condition in Brazil at the moment, I think what everybody immediately identifies as the two biggest problems to its economic but also social development are infrastructure, just the lack of basic infrastructure, of roads, of railways, of metro, again, the lack of investment, not only during the military dictatorship, but also thereafter, in the 90s. And education. These are the two things. An education system that still doesn't work. There's still high degrees of barely functional literacy. Yeah? People maybe can read the metro signs and things like that, but they come out of school with not really functional capacities in reading and writing and things like that. So that sort of education is one of the elements that has come into the Biennale in the recent past, and something that for us has been very, very interesting. So this idea that there are various connections with schools, and I think Galit will talk about this, which has allowed a different kind of audience to come in. And in the recent past, the audience numbers have been much higher, largely as a result of this relationship with education. So the last one had about 500,000 visitors, I think the one before about 600,000. So it's now quite a big event, not only for the elite, which it remains, but also for these educational activities and things like that. So basically those are the ingredients, I suppose, that we were faced with. And then we brought along ourselves, the 5 of us, who were invited as a team to take on this Bienal. We have 2 other colleagues, Benjamin Cerrusi and Luisa Proenza, who are based in Brazil and from Brazil. And then we have a huge staff of about 60 people who are the permanent staff of the Bienal itself. And some of those are absolutely crucial, of course, to realizing this and also to discussing it. So in a sense, our task is also shaped by their capacities and their networks and their links. So, I mean, sometimes maybe it's imaginable that when you curate a Biennale, you have a kind of carte blanche, and often that's sort of talked about in those terms, yeah, that you can basically do, you know, whatever you want. But that's, of course, completely ridiculous. I mean, all these parameters that I've talked about are basically shaping what is possible, you know, from the building to the people who work there to this particular history, all shapes what we can do. And I think the job that we have is to shift that history a little bit in our direction, which Galit and Oren and I will try and talk about what we mean by our direction, rather than shift it in another direction. But it's an incremental step, yeah, given the whole infrastructure that already exists.
One of the things which is related also to the concept, one of the questions how we can work there, which the time frame is quite short. It's, I think, 13 months that we will work. We started in August, really to work there, to be there. One of the first decisions that we did, it was to stay and to live in Brazil. So most of us are based in Brazil now. When we are traveling, we're traveling from Brazil to Europe, to Israel, to other places, instead of traveling from Europe or Israel to Brazil. So we are locating the everyday life. I think also it's one part that's shaping the process or the Biennale and how we are dealing with it. But just talk about education. So what you didn't say, there are 500,000 visitors, or we expect to at least 500,000 visitors. Half of them are coming from schools around São Paulo. Some of them from São Paulo, but some of the cities, the satellite cities that are coming to São Paulo. So the education department working when there is no Biennale, it's around 40 people. During the Biennale, it's more than 100 people working every day in the space. I think Oren gave us the information when he checked it that it's around 1,000 kids are every 1 hour inside the building. The building it's used is around 30,000 square meters. And if we think about the sound, so we will not have any control. We will try to control the sound, but still with 1,000 kids in every hour, we need to consider it. And I think one of the things that we are trying to do is to take into consider all the parameters. We saw one big exhibition that was in the pavilion. And for example, this is one of the processes that we are working. The children that are coming are sitting outside of the building for 15 minutes after the bus, a few hours in the bus with the sandwich and a drink. Choco. Many of them are excited just by going with the bus to the Biennale. So the Biennale, it's not the thing to go with the bus. For some of them, it's the attraction. So how they can enter and see an exhibition in this size? What is the effect? How it can work? So one of the things that we decided to do is that all the process of entering and trying to create kind of a buffer zone for the kids that are coming. It's half of our audience. So it needs to start from the inside. It can't be that they are sitting outside, somebody told them about the exhibition, then they are entering and boom, they are inside the exhibition. So later on we'll show the building, so you will see there is one level which is the level of the park. And the kids that are coming, it's every visitor, it's not only for the kids, it will be area of registration. Registration, it's also administrative, but it's also the process, what they need to take for the journey of the exhibition. That they can choose the journey, they can choose the way, but also to have a moment that they can relax and start to explore the exhibition, not in the moment that they are pushed inside a group of hundreds and hundreds of kids. To working with education, the education department is quite big, and what we planned for them, in the beginning we had a sort of resistance, but we asked from the education department to work with the artists on the research. So artists that are coming to Brazil to create new work are supported by the education department. So they communicate with the artists, communicating with the artists before they're coming, and create a plan for them, what they can see according to the interest and the subject that this or that artist is working on. What it's created is two things. First, it's help to the artist and help us in the production and to host the artist. The second thing, which is more important, the information that will come to the visitor will be from first hand. It's not that the education will read the text and learn and repeat what the curator said. They have a direct relation with the development of the work from the beginning. So they will be much more engaged and identify with the process itself, so they can tell more about the exhibition or the artwork. So it's not to talk about the object or the painting or the video, it's to talk about the process this artwork was made. In the beginning it creates kind of resistance because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, it's each one of them, each one of the artists is studied by the education department and they're working on the program according, so it's a tailor-made research for any one of the artists. Other process that we developed, well, the thing which I'm quite happy, it's, but this is I think quite common, it's the curatorial workshop. Curatorial workshop in Brazil, the education or curatorial courses are not common, and we offered, so this is after the first workshop. It's 3 sessions, which was open call, and we support the young curator, or not only curator, it's also writer or architect or designer that's working around exhibition, and we are focusing on tools, what kind of tools, less about art history in the curatorial workshop. There are 3 meetings, 2 meetings before the opening of the Biennale, the last one will be during the Biennale. Okay, there are many videos, yeah, one can see it. The first one we try to deal with rewriting history. We invite Walid Raad. I assume that many of you know the work of Walid, and he's focused about what he called the invention of Arab art, or what is Arab art, which is different than Muslim art, when Arab art become Arab art. So he talked about it. Anna Longoni talked about the history of conceptual art in Latin America. Charles and Pablo talked about the history of biennales and the history of exhibitions. So how stories are created. The second and the third will be on other subject, but this can. And the nice thing around this workshop that the Biennale adopted, and from now on, a curatorial workshop will be part of the Biennale. So from the 31st to continue, the Biennale will offer for young curator the possibility to have a workshop around the Biennale, to talk with the curator, with the artist, and to work with them. Open meetings. Open meetings. Open meetings. Basically, it's very close to the format that we're having now. But now we are doing propaganda. We don't really do what we do in Brazil. One of the things that we decided, since we are not coming from Brazil, and each one of us, if Pablo is based in London, Nuria based in Spain, in Valencia, Charles in the Netherlands, you know, the knowledge that we have around the world, we are not traveling to many places outside of the South Hemisphere. We're traveling mainly inside Brazil and in Latin America. The process with the open meeting, we're going to every big city in every state of Brazil, and we are meeting people and we're coming with a set of questions. For us, it's not to talk about we're not coming to talk about the Biennale, we're coming to listen. So we have certain kind of trigger questions, and when the process is successful, so we are most of the time the listeners and not the speaker in the meetings. And the question, yeah, this is nice image. It's from and the history of the place. It's called the place called Casa de Povo. It's the Beta'am, and it's built by the Jewish community. Many of them communists that decided not to come to Israel, non-Zionists, and they built it like many other Casa de Povo or the folk house around the globe after the Second World War. So this is just the case, but this is in Brazil, in São Paulo. But we visit many other countries. The idea of cities, states.
Yeah.
And countries. Yes, outside of Brazil, the countries, the continent. It's also to give the possibility to meet us, because usually as a curator you go to a place, so you have the list of artists that you should meet, somebody prepare for you the list, and there are many other people that you don't meet and you don't communicate with. So the open meeting is also a possibility for other people that living in a place that are not in the list, that we didn't plan to see us and to invite us to the studio, which was part of the process that was important for us. We also, going back to the previous Biennale, the focus was on Brazilian art, but from the perspective of São Paulo and Rio, which are the centers. In many places that we arrived, it was this thing that we knew, but not so, you don't really register it, that many places that we can, it's the first time that the São Paulo Biennale curator are coming and visiting us. The state is huge, yes. Brazil, it's and every the continent it's huge, and the states are very different. To go from Porto Alegre to go to Salvador, it's completely different community, or Belém, different communities, different people, different history, and their relation also to São Paulo or to the Biennale is different. So yes.
What are the three approaches that you said that you were asking in the open?
Okay, we started the first time, yes, about the one of
the question.
Yes, the question was, what are the three trigger questions that we are asking? It's a bit different from one place to the other, but the main question is about the local narrative. We learned from the beginning that the national narrative, yes, it's something that people are unable to answer. And this is also related to something which is significant and quite interesting in Brazil. The institutions are very weak. There is no story. There is, lately they opened the Pinacoteca in São Paulo. They're dealing with Brazilian art and the history of Brazilian art, but it's the only one. And there are very few books that were written about the history of art, but art is not significant in this sense. And there are many answers why, and when we go and we ask mainly the question, so it's not anymore about the national narrative, but it's about the cultural narrative, or the narrative and how they see themselves. And one of the things that's from the beginning, this is a repetition, it's quite funny that we all came from different places, yes, and we don't have one narrative, but this is repeated in different way. So it's become sort of the narrative, yes, because we are coming from different places, because we keep our identity. If it's true or not, it's another question, yes, how you read it as a sociologist that we talk, or anthropologist, but it's one of the questions. And this is also, like, for example, in Belém, in the Amazonia, their relation to Brazil, the continent, is very different than in São Paulo and Rio. It's completely different, yes, they have the like winter and summer, they disagree about when it's winter, when it's summer. They disagree about many things which is related, and those kind of questions led us to learn faster about the community. It's two things basically that we do in the open meeting. One, it's to listen what people say, but the other thing is how people say, how people talk, how they communicate. And this become kind of a key for us, a key to understand the different places. We spend between 5 days to a week in a place which is outside of São Paulo. It's not a lot, yes, and everything or almost everything is new. So how we can make the process faster, how we can work, and how we can not lead only by the galleries or the museum which are in Rio again and São Paulo, how we can work in other places and what kind of art. And it's quite interesting because what's quite clearly that the one that are working in the center or move to the center dealing quite a lot with the history of the local art, which is neo-concretism, modernism, and the one in Belém or Belo Horizonte or other places inventing themselves and become much more contemporary and in certain way much more interesting.
Can I ask another question? It seems that you're dealing very intensively with text and not with visual in a way, writing stories or how to talk about things that are not yet exist. So would you can say something?
Okay.
Maybe it's a good time to talk a little bit about. I could talk about the concept, but the magic thing about, because I think this question is leading to it, but there's something magical about our concept of the exhibition. Every time Charles is talking about it, it makes perfect sense to me. And I have this about 10 minutes that I'm still like dwelling in it, and it's like really, it's so perfect, and I'm going to work like really excitingly, and then it wears off. So I think it's and that's kind of the power about it. But I think I should. No, I actually think you should start.
Okay.
And maybe the two of us will react, and hopefully there will still be a little bit time to talk about one of the datums, which is also the space and the ideas about the space.
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether this will answer it, but it maybe will approach it, and maybe this image, which is the image that we chose, is also significant for that, and it is an image after all. And the title, which is how to talk about things that don't exist, is a title that will change. Because inevitably, before the experience of the exhibition itself, what you have are words. What you have is text. The problem is that it's not possible to talk about an exhibition. It's possible to look at an exhibition, it's possible to experience an exhibition, it's possible to walk through an exhibition. But when you start talking, then you're in the realm of text at that moment. So we wanted to start with this title of how to talk about things that don't exist. And I'll come back to the don't exist a bit, things that don't exist in a minute. But then to change this verb. So over the time, this verb will go through learn about, use, struggle against, and other verbs as well that we get to think about, that will include this idea of things that don't exist, as in a sense the core of the artistic practices that we're interested in engaging. And those things that don't exist are also not necessarily words, they're things. And so they're also things that have appearance and have a visual element to them. So I think it's only just to recognize that when you're doing these kind of talks, or when you're propagandizing the exhibition, you're inevitably going to talk about it. And to show a whole load of images, I don't think would make any sense at all at this point, because actually the experience of the exhibition is not looking at a screen, a whole series of individual artworks. And that would be, I think, an even more false impression of what we're trying to do. And also, we don't know what we're trying to do. We're still in that process of developing. So I hope that comes some way to answering it, and then I'll try and talk about the topic a little bit, or I suppose one of the things that we brought with us was an understanding that the history of Brazilian art is caught up with the history of modernism and of modernity in general, just as much as this building, which Oren will talk about, will show you that it's caught up in that history of the idea of the modern. Let's just call it the modern, and then wrap modernity and modernism and everything else like that into it at the moment. So this history of the modern is something which is very present not only in Brazil and in Brazil's identity of itself, but also in the Bienal. There are significant Brazilian art movements, many of which are very well known internationally now, concretismo, neo-concretismo, which are essentially coming out of this modern tradition and then tropicalizing it, if you like, making it tropical. Yeah? And tropicalismo is also a term that's used, yeah? But it's essentially coming out of the modern. I suppose we felt, and not only for the situation in Brazil, but a lot of the work that we've been doing, I think in different ways, has been to understand that that period is over. That period and relationship to modernity is no longer something which functions in the world as it currently is. Yeah? Many people identify that moment as 1989, it could also be 1968, it could be 1945. There are many moments, I think, where modernity or the modern ended, yeah? and it's still around as well. It's a sort of zombie which keeps on going. But nevertheless, we didn't want to build the exhibition, as so many biennales have been built on in the past, in relationship to this question of the modern. And so what that meant is we clearly need to build it on some ground. And also we were interested in this idea of what happens when you look beyond the modern and you start to look back to other histories that are not only pre-modern but are simply other histories that still exist currently, relations between indigenous knowledge, between African knowledge which comes through the slave trade into Brazil, and various other kinds of arcane, I suppose, practices, religious practices to some extent, belief systems, which haven't been fully modernized, they haven't been fully incorporated into the modern discourse, and is in a way something that even tropicalismo wanted to get away from. Yeah, in cleaning and clarifying and becoming modern, it was to get away from those things that were seen not even as pre-modern, but simply as non-modern, yeah, as not relevant to this discourse. So that became one of the intriguing aspects. The other aspect that I think we felt about as being of importance as a starting point is that if art is to have some purchase on the world, it has to do it on its own terms. In other words, it's not necessarily great for art to be other things to such an extent that it loses its own particularity. Yeah? So that could be sociology, or it could be product design. Yeah? I mean, there are many forms it can take, which essentially mean that it's pretending to be something that it's not, or it's maybe succeeding in being something that it's not, but it's losing the particularity of it. And that particularity we defined as being able to present rather than represent, to present experiences and conditions that we are, and when I say we, I suppose I try to mean the human race, that we are in different ways conscious of, but we can't really express, and certainly can't express in words. One of our analyses of the world would be that because of the dominance of the economic model and the dominance of the economic model by statistics, it means that often everything is reduced down to numbers. Yeah? Profit and loss in the most simple way, but also in terms of visitor numbers or whatever. There's a sort of reduction in our understanding of the world, in our understanding of the complexity of the world through this economic lens. And this is why, in many ways, it's so effective, because it makes it very simple. It's just a yes or no answer. Yeah? Did you make a profit or a loss? Or yeah, good, bad. Yeah? Somehow ethics and everything like that are caught up within this economization of our society, of our minds, in a sense, yeah? The way that we can think. And so things that are not able to be reduced to numbers, or for whom the numbers are irrelevant, yeah? That they might be able to reduce to numbers, but they don't make any difference. Aspects that we could think was emotional, as spiritual, as some of those old, again, pre-modern conditions, which I think we still all experience as the human race in different ways. That those are not really present, to the extent that you could say they don't exist. To the extent that they don't exist in terms of practical application in our decisions in our daily lives about what decisions are made for us by the authorities, but also what decisions we make and how we judge various elements. Yeah, it's difficult to account for these. I think we all do this, and we all do this without knowing it, and we all do this and saying, oh, well, I do that. My motivations for that are not exactly clearly economic. But often there's still a tendency to try and justify it through that number system. Yeah? To try and justify our actions through that number system, however true or not that is. So we thought, well, art is a way in which you can get access to precisely those aspects of human experience, those aspects of the world, which are not accounted for through the economic system that we have imposed upon us. And when I say economic system, I really mean that it's the filter through which everything is judged. Yeah? So whether it's an art exhibition, or whether it's a football match, or whether it's a concert, or whether or whether it's falling in love, all these things are judged through that economic filter to a large extent. So it's not just this field of economics that I'm talking about; it's the fact the field of economics has spread way beyond its own territory. So that process was what brought us to this idea of things that don't exist, and I think that you'll add other things to it. Yeah.
How we can talk about things that do not exist. Charles talked about statistics. I will start from this, but I think there is many ways how to interpret it. For example, we've been in Belém. It's one of the richest areas in Brazil. It's close to the Amazon, so it's oil, it's mines, agriculture, but the place is poor or neglected. And I asked just what is the number of the employment in the city, and they say, oh, it's very low. But later I understood that many of the people which are unemployed never registered. So they are not numbers, they are not statistics really. So this can be considered in a certain way, if I connect to what you said before, yes? Yeah. How we can talk about things that do not exist. But by talking about the things that do not exist, we make them exist. This is the first step that we can. And it's the question about the indigenous, about the history. Before I said that people don't talk about, or it's strange for them to talk about the narratives. There is a narrative, so certain things do not exist. It can be, I think, one of the things that it can be interpreted to many ways, yes, and in this title, so we can work, but also we can look at it from more biological or scientific. All the things that we created, culture, are not exist. They are not exist on the opposite, and this is related to your question, yes, without the discourse around them, or how they can be exist with the discourse that's related to them. So there are many ways, and I think each one of us also interpreted the title, the way that we work in different ways. Sorry. Thank you. One of the things that we talk about processes also is to recognize certain kind of art practice that happen in one place and we see it in another place, and to bring those artists or group of artists to work together, or at least to introduce them and to give them the possibility to work together. It can be from different places in the globe, and to bring them to think, because we think that the practice is very interesting and they should know about them. So this is another platform. By the way, maybe when we talk about the Biennale, a few things that we said from the beginning, we're talking about a site. So the building is a site, and when you enter, you have an experience. So let's talk about exhibition. Also, if we look today at the model of Biennales, we see a very strong direction of Biennale that transform for 3 months to a museum. So we see more and more Biennale that imitate the condition of the museum and the concept and the historical background of an exhibition that's made in the museum. It's also related to loan work that need coming from museums, And somehow we feel that the Biennale have a different role. Museums exist, and it's not a competition. So what Biennale should do today, or how we can work with the Biennale, which is not an art fair, and not the museum. Sorry, I put the two on two sides, but like when we talk about big events, this is the two models that we see how Biennale transformed today. So how we can work around the Biennale as a site, as an experience, as an event, and to consider the audience. So question about, text appeared, so question, how we use text in the exhibition when we know that the education system are not good as many other places. So it's people that come into the place, some of them will feel frustrated that there are text and it takes them a long time to read. So how we mediate in different way, what kind of tools we need to use. I don't want to continue because access, Charles talked about access, elite and education and mobility, but I think this is a wide discussion about Brazil. And maybe it's good that Oren will talk about the process that he developed, because since we are talking about processes, it will be interesting.
I just continue maybe a few words about this sentence that became our concept, if you will, which is something that's kind of, it's just a sentence that is a combination of words that kind of provoke our thinking process in a way that's not being very determined. It could be, could be a question, but it could be also a statement, right? I mean, it doesn't have to have a question mark at the end. And it talks, I mean, it is about text, it's about existence and corporality, and it's, I think, very much about art. It's about the practice of art, and I think I agreed with you when you said that each one of us interprets it in a different way, and interpretation is developing. For example, we can focus not on the relations between text and existence, but actually focus about the how. And perhaps we could think that every artist develops a different how, in a way that they're dealing with something that is not being formulated, in a practice that has not been formulated by these obvious way that the economy recognizes that Charles was talking about. So the hows and practices and the instruments that artists develop to manifest values and meaning is something also that is very important for me in that sentence, in the way that we choose words. How to talk? If I need to talk about the architecture, it's another example how to talk about things that do not exist. I would say, להמשיך משהו שגלית אמרה לגבי הפרויקטים. זאת אומרת, הרבה מאוד מהתהליכים הם תהליכים של יצירה, של פרוקציה, של פרויקטים, לא בחירה, או בעצם עד אפשר לומר לשבועות האחרונים, לא היה פה בכלל תהליך של בחירה של עבודות. וזה תהליך שהוא ריסקי, וזה תהליך שנאמן למחשבה להפוך את הביאנלה הזאת, את הפלטפורמה הזאת, שאני חושב שקיבלתם תיאור מאוד מתומצת, אבל מקיף של עד כמה זה סוג של פרויקט בפני עצמו, להתמודד עם הסביבה הזאת, שבתוכה מייצרים סוג של תערוכה כל כך גדולה בקנה מידה לאומי שכזה. אז זה נאמן למחשבה להסתכל על זה כאיבנט, כאירוע. להסתכל על כל התהליך שאנחנו עוברים עכשיו כאירוע, שלא נפתח בשני לספטמבר ונמשך ב3 חודשים, ושלא התחיל כשהתחלנו לעבוד ויימשך. אנחנו מקווים גם מעבר לזמן הסגירה של הביאנלה. אני עברתי קודם שצ'ארלס דיבר במהירות על האתר שיש לנו, מבנה של קרוב ל-30,000 מטר שאוסקר נימאייר תכנן, נפתח ב-1956. משהו מאוד מרשים, מאוד גדול, ולי כארכיטקט בחבורה, זה שאחראי על בסופו של דבר איזשהו אקזיסטנס, כן, של התערוכה הזאת, של היצירה של איזשהו משהו גולמי שהמבקר נתקל בו, התהליך הזה של הפרויקט ולא בחירת העבודות מאוד מתסכל זה לא, אבל מאתגר. מאתגר זאת המילה, ואני מחפש פה אימג' אחד, סליחה, כן, בואו נרוץ רגע על האימג'ים האלה, ככה נראה הבניין מבחוץ, האורך שלו הוא 250 מטר, הוא רבע קילומטר אורך, על פי רוב 4 קומות או 3 באזורים מסוימים, וזה ככה בשביל האווירה, אבל אני וצ'ארלס ביקרנו שם באוגוסט, זה הפעם הראשונה שאני הייתי שם, יש פה איזה צילום שאני רוצה לחפש, זה בעצם נקודת המוצא, כן, משהו כזה, אנחנו מסתכלים על אחד מהחלקים, זה כבודו, כן, desert, exactly. Exactly, that's what we said. And we still call it, our working title for this place is the desert area. וזה באמת מין מדבר, המודול של העמודים פה הוא 120 מטר, זאת אומרת, זה 12 מטר על 10 מטר, כל העמודים כאן כתובים, זה פשוט אינסופי, זה נמשך. אז איך ניגשים לדבר כזה, בייחוד שאני לא יודע מה הן העבודות. אני אציג לכם, אתם, כן, שאלה?
עכשיו בעברית. Okay, I'm saying English because
Thank you.
I'm saying a lot of numbers now. And also, I am interested in if the Biennale takes tickets for people or for this.
It's
no,
free.
It's free. Free. And I was saying, can I know the budget of the Biennale? If you know, because you mentioned 100 people working, and now we are speaking from Israel that it's a poor country in public budget, and it sounds really
it's around the budget, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think that we have all the figures, you know, we're not thinking with the keeping
with the salaries and things, we don't really have that.
But in general, the budget for the Biennale is 8 million euro, which is not the budget for the artworks. Okay, it's including maintenance of the building, salaries, keeping the team working there for 1 year. So what left for the exhibition, it's much smaller, it's 10%.
Anyhow, it's from Israeli point, it's an incredible amount of money.
Yeah, I mean, it's also related to that history. Yeah? It goes back to 1951, and it's gone bankrupt a couple of times in its history. Yes, but I think the fact that it has that long-term history means that there are certain relationships with certain companies and things like that, which have been basically a long-term commitments. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to organise free transport so that people can get there more easily, because obviously, although it's free to get in, it's difficult to access the park, which is not very accessible anyway. There's no metro line and things like that. I mean, of course, we're aware of the responsibility, but it also doesn't help us that much. I mean, it's not the money that gives us that responsibility. I think it's the number of people. That's actually who we feel more responsible to. That's why we've emphasised that rather than the budget. The budget is never enough, but it's also way too much. You can, in a sense, it's what we have. But the real responsibility we have is to the human beings who we're going to attract. And also the sort of the young adults and other people who don't really have access to that kind of culture at the moment, who aren't going to museums and things like that. That's a big part of what we want to attract, you know, and working in the different communities in the periphery. With different projects, with artists, and hopefully allowing them to come to the Biennale, giving them a voice in the Biennale, is what I think makes it's the thing that makes us most interested.
Maybe you can say something about you're saying that you think about the particularity of art, that art is not sociology and not design, and maybe not architecture, not political activism, and until now you're talking about all the other things. So I'm wondering what are you thinking about the particularity of art, and why is the artworks coming so late in the procedure?
I mean, the artworks are coming late because that's the process. Sorry, the artworks are coming late because that's the process that we're engaged in. Because we have 13 months, so we have to work in parallel. And so you have to work on the art, on the artist, on the architecture, on the design, on the image, on the talking about, all at the same time. There's no possibility in which you can structure it in another way. If we had 5 years, we would do it differently. I think so. That's clear. I mean, these things that don't exist is what we're defining as what art does. I mean that's what it does. So it's not the moment you would define it beyond that, without being specific about particular projects, is the moment you get into a sort of generalization, which I don't think would be that useful. It's the capacity of art. It's the capability. What's the capability of art? Of course, it touches on and is inspired by political activism, by sociology, by all these other things, but it's not those. There's a difference, and it's that difference that we want to touch on. So where a political activist would have to deal very much with the things that exist, an artist maybe can try and talk about those things that don't exist, but are nevertheless in the same territory as a political activist.
I wanted, when, one of the things when we look at artworks that engage with socio-political issues, I think one of the things that I learned also here, yes, that it's very important to let, for example, to activists to work or the social worker to continue to do the work and not to try to replace them, because then you create something which is very dangerous for the social worker, for the activist, yes, to do the job. So I think this is I think, and the question what the art does, if we will put the line, this is, so we can go home, close the art, I think, and leave it already what we are dreaming, no, that art can do, or imagine.
You are coming after another cultural huge event that will end before you begin.
Yes.
Yeah,
can you be ready, the World Cup, and the other sides gathering around, the small army that is being built, people are hitting the street. Can you in any way be ready for that? This is, there will be, you will proceed and nobody knows what will happen.
I have to agree. It's we are very working not on or upon very unstable ground, and the political every day is shifting, and this is, I don't know if I could say that it's not a challenge, because this is something that we are kind of working alongside with the events that are happening in Brazil, formal like the World Cup, and informal like all the rallies and demonstrations, and it's part of the very big unknowns that making this, when I said that we started to work in August, and hopefully the Bienal, our Bienal, is something that is actually taking, it's going to take the course of many months, and not just those 3 months when it's open as an object or time.
Yeah, I think it's not just, we are, there are 3 events. That it's one gonna happen before, it's the World Cup, election, which will be, I think, during, and the Olympics after. Yeah, local elections and the Olympics after.
Good seats for the apocalypse.
Sorry? No, but if you ask about like what happened in June in São Paulo, yes, in parallel to what we could see in Istanbul, for example, this is quite interesting. Beside the tariff zero, this is how they call it, yes, calling for free transportation. I think there is something else we need to consider from the place that we are coming. We can analyze, read and talk with people, but I think one of the strong things that I think happened also here in certain moment, for a moment, yes, It's the collapse of the model of democratia representativity, the representative democracy. And I think one of the reasons that people are going outside is we talk about tariff zero, but most of the people that demonstrate, yes, it's the one that can offer to pay the ticket for the metro or for the bus. The one that can't afford it are working, so they are not in the demonstrations. In most cases, we can talk about that it's like Ma'amad al-Benaim or, you know, and there are reasons for it. Because others need to work, but I think what people say, which is, I think it's something that it's the people say no, or, you know, in different places, yes, no to the model of the one that present them. They don't want this kind of representation, and I think this is also can reflect to our practice, you know, how we're dealing when we see the model of the model of democracy is collapsing, or democracy that we know, the voting system, the representation, our representation, how we can deal with representation, yes, which is one of the things that we're doing, how as a curator, how we represent or present the artist. We represent the artist or present it. What is the present, what we, you know, so that this dialectic also reflects to our work beside the socio-political situation in Brazil. I think it's a wider question that we need to ask, not only in Brazil.
אני רק אומר שההתחלה הייתה מה שאתם רואים כאן. אני אדבר על החלק הראשון, אני אדבר על איזושהי גישה שיצרנו כשאין לנו בעצם עבודות. ואיך אנחנו מייצרים משהו אפשר להגיד שמאמר מוסגר ארכיטקטים שכל הזמן עושים את זה, מדברים על דברים שלא, או מסתכלים, מתבוננים, בוחנים דברים שלא קיימים. נכון? הם קיימים באיזשהו מצב ביניים כזה, הם קיימים כרפרזנטציה אולי, ולא כחלק מהמציאות היומיומית של הציבור. אז התחלנו בסקירה ובבחינה ובלמידה, אני פתחתי פה כמה PDFים כאלה של בעצם כל ה-30 הביאנלות הקודמות. יצרנו איזושהי חוברת שמסתכלת על הביאנלות הללו. אחד מהדברים שהרגשנו זה שהביאנלות האלה, הבניין, אם להגיד את זה בפשטות, כי אין לנו זמן הבניין פשוט גדול מדי, והביאנלות האלה תמיד נראות כמו איזשהו, המחשבה היא, כמו שיכולתם לראות אולי בתוכניות, זה שכאילו מילאו את הבניין הזה כקונטיינר, עד ככה מילאו אותו, חילקו אותו ומילאו אותו בעבודות, עד שבעצם נגמר המקום, כמה שהבניין הזה גדול. ואם היו עוד איזה 20 מטר נוספים, ככה שאני מה להוסיף, אז היו מוצאים עוד איזה 3, 4, 5 עבודות להוסיף. זו הייתה התחושה. והמחשבה הראשונית הייתה בעצם להסתכל על הבניין הזה ולהגיד, בעצם לחשוב על הבניין הזה, איך אפשר לפרק אותו. זאת המחשבה הראשונית. התחלנו לחשוב על שימוש בכניסות השונות, שכמובן שלבניין כזה גדול יש, באופן כזה שמתחיל לחלק אותו לפרופורציות, למבנים שונים, ועדיין בלי לחשוב על הבניין הזה כבניין של תערוכה, אולי זו חלוקה לכמה גופים אדמיניסטרטיביים שהשתמשו בו ביחד. התחלנו לשייך איכויות מסוימות, או כותרות מסוימות לכל אחד מהמבנים האלה בתוך המבנה. באיזשהו שלב התחלנו לחשוב על זה בצורה קצת יותר תלת-ממדית, בצורה קצת יותר חווייתית. מתי החלוקה בעצם יותר נוגעת בפרופורציות דומות, מתי החלוקה עוסקת יותר בטיפולוגיות ארכיטקטוניות דומות, כמו למשל כאן, כשיש לנו בעניין הרמפות, מה שקראנו. כל מיני שמות, כל מיני איכויות, כל מיני אפיונים. התחילו להיווצר לכל אחד מהבניינים, כמה זה בניינים בתוך הבניין, והתחילו להיות חלק מהדיון המשותף שלנו על המקום הזה כאתר ועל החוויה כאירוע. הפירוק התחיל להיות יותר ויותר פיזי, כן? כמו המודלי קרטון, מה שקראנו. אני יכול להראות לכם בעצם איזושהי התחלה של מחשבה, של איך בעצם אנחנו לוקחים את המסה, את הנפח הכל כך גדול הזה, ומתחילים בעצם להרכיב ממנו דרכים שונות לחוות אותו. אתם מציצים לתוך היום, זאת אומרת היום אתם מפגשים איתנו לתוך איזה מין סוג של אמצע של תהליך, ומה שאני מראה לך עכשיו הוא סוג של התחלה. זאת אומרת, כל הדברים האלה נועדו לייצר איזשהו מצע למפגש עם העבודות עצמן, עם העבודות, עם הפרויקטים שמתחילים להתפתח, עם העבודות הספציפיות שמתחילות לקבל ולבקש את הדרישות שלהם, את ההצטברות, את המסלול של ההצטברות. אלה הם המקומות, מה שאתם רואים פה זה מין רעיונות שלפני ואחרי הארטיקולציה הזאת, שבעצם הופכת את הקונטיינר הענק הזה לסדרה של מקומות שונים עם איכויות שונות. אני יכול להדגים איך למשל, אם אנחנו מסתכלים מכיוון של רפרנס, אם למשל האזור שגלית קודם הזכירה, שהופך להיות אזור שאנחנו רואים לא יהיו בעבודות אמנות, זה האזור שבו אותם ילדים, אותם אנשים, מייצרים את הרג'יסטריישן, את הזמן הזה שלוקח להם להתאקלם, אז אולי זה איזה מין מקום כזה שממשיך את הפארק בצורות שונות, כן? ומייצר אולי איזה קומיוניטס אחר, לא דווקא דרך החוויה, אולי זה, בין אם זה איזה שהם עבודות שאנחנו מסתכלים עליהן, זאת אומרת, יכול להיות שהדברים האלה הרבה יותר פתוחים. וככה, זאת אומרת, היום כשאנחנו כבר, היום בשלב אחר, כן, כל אחד מהבניינים התחיל לקבל כלים שדרכם אנחנו מתחילים לבדוק אותו. אם אנחנו מסתכלים על הבניין שברור לנו שהוא הבניין של הרמפות, שהוא בניין שבעצם עוסק באיזושהי ורטיקליות, שאיזשהו קשר ואיזשהו זיקות שאפשר לייצר בתוך כל שלושת הקומות, אז אנחנו עושים אנליזה של הדבר הזה, בהתחלה כמשטחים על הרצפה והצטברויות, ומתחילים לחשוב במודלים על הדרך שבה אנחנו להדביק אזורים שונים ביחד עם משמעות אחת. או אולי, אם אני אעבור על זה מהר, כסטאדי של משטחים ורטיקליים במקרה הזה, כדי לראות איך אנחנו בעצם מייצרים איזה מין הצטברות והדבקה כזאת. זה לא אומר שהתערוכה תראה כך כמובן, זה רק אומר שאלה כלים שאנחנו יכולים אחר כך להפעיל כשהעבודות נמצאות באיזה שהם כיוונים. אם אנחנו מסתכלים על המבנה הזה, אנחנו חושבים אולי איך איזה אלמנט אחד גדול, איזה מין אי כזה, התחלנו לייצר מחשבות על איים שיושבים במקום הזה ועובד עם הלשון הזאת שנימה יצר כאן באיזשהו ריקוד כזה של קונטרפונקט כזה, מתחיל לייצר איזשהו מפגש בין איזה אירוע חברתי לבין הארכיטקטורה האיקונית של המקום הזה וכדומה. אני חושב שדי במהירות, אלא אם כן אתם מרגישים if you feel that I really missed on something that you want to talk about, I think this is a kind of a basic or preliminary attitude we're developing, and it's been a few weeks, I think in our case maybe 2 weeks, it feels like a long time that we passed this stage and we're starting to look at this as a field or a מצע, כן? platform, more than a month, that this is a sort of a platform that starts to absorb, כאילו לקלוט, to receive את העבודות הספציפיות, את הדיון בעבודות הספציפיות, ואנחנו חוזרים בעצם לסכמות המקוריות שהראיתי, שמוקדמות מאוד, הן כבר מסוף אוגוסט, כשאנחנו חושבים על בעצם דרכים שונות לצבור ולתפור את החוויה, וגם מחשבה שאולי החוויה, אולי יהיו כמה תסריטים, אולי יהיו כמה דרכים שימצאו למבקר לצבור בעצם את המפגשים שלו ולחוות את התערוכה.
I mean, maybe just to round off, before we go to some questions, is to say, so the current stage that we're at, we've invited around 25 artists around that to produce new work, and there are artists now in Brazil and have been in the last month and a half, and we're looking at a smaller Biennale than in the past, so around 75 to 80 projects in total. I think we're more or less at the halfway stage, and so there's still processes going on, and we'll basically have to complete the list by the end of March and have a fairly good idea, and then we'll go into production. And then the exhibition opens on the 6th of September, but the preview days are from the 2nd to the 5th.
So very relaxed.
Exactly.
Another question, maybe it's a little bit provocative. I mean, we saw really beautiful 3D images and of the building. And do you feel you have to feel this building?
No, I think the whole, what Oren's analysis has allowed us to do is to not feel we have to fill the building. And that I think if we hadn't had that, we would feel we had to fill the building. So in a sense, I think the traditional way has been to make the exhibition and then to see how to squeeze it into the building. That's been the traditional way in which it's been curated, and I think that what Oren's analysis allows us to do is to avoid that. So that's the wonderful thing about it.
All the exhibitions in this building?
Yeah.
I can add something to this, because about the first week when I just started being engaged, I had a brilliant idea. I said this building is so great that we should leave one floor totally empty, like the most intense floor. And luckily I did the analysis of the things, and then we realized that 28 did that. So there goes this idea. Yeah, the empty. Yeah, I kind of קצת פלפלתי את הסיפור, אבל כמובן. It's just
Yes, for the sake of the lecture.
Yeah, and this is the image of the Biennale, which is by an Indian artist called Prabhakar Rajput, who we've worked with in the past, and we basically sent him some of the materials that we've been generating around the idea of how to talk about things that do not exist, and he came up with a number of drawings, and I suppose we like the pre-modern element which is contained in this drawing particularly.
Thinking about how to experience the Biennale for people who won't go to or who won't be at the Biennale, is there? I mean, it's
okay. There is maybe one thing related to the open meeting, but one of the things that we committed. I don't know, to communicate the Biennale. You asked more about communication. I want to answer.
Or experiencing or communicating.
When the Biennale ends, the part of the works will be traveled around Brazil by an institute called Sagiv. They have, sometimes they have a building, sometimes it will be without a building, so we will talk again, or we will present, so we will continue the discussions after, I think around 2015, we will still continue to communicate the exhibition by sending it outside of São Paulo in different forms. It really depends on the place itself, how they can host, and we need to find a way how to do it. So this is one way to answer you. I don't know if I answered.
Can you say something about the participants? The artists? Or it's
אומן ישראלי אחד כבר היה, יוחאי, הוא חזר אתמול, יוחאי אברהמי. אנחנו לא, יש את הכל, כן, כאן, הוא חזר שם אתמול מברזיל. אנחנו עדיין לא סגרנו את הרשימה, ויש לנו התחייבות כלפי הביאנלה. אומנים, יכולים להגיד מספר שמות של אומנים, אחד מהדרך שהמתקשרים, או כאילו איך אנחנו מעבירים אינפורמציה, communication, של הביאנלה, או באופן שבו היא עובדת, sorry, I can't translate it for you now. אחד הדרכים, זה לא רק לראיין, כמובן, רוצים לראיין את האוצרים, ועוד פעם את האוצרים, ועוד פעם את האוצרים, אבל אחד הדברים זה אומנים שמגיעים עכשיו למחקר, או לעבודה, הם אלה שבעצם מדברים עם העיתונות, או מרואיינים. אז אני יכולה להגיד ש... I can't say. There are more Israeli artists that we already chosen. It will be out easily, but...
No, but don't say the Israeli.
Sorry? Others, okay. The one that, okay, it was Walid Nilbar... Gubesh? Yes, Nilbar. Pakahaba Pashput. Juan Ferez. Yes, he also wrote...
Juan Perez,
Arekoya. Juan Perez, I think it's fair enough. I think this is what we have up to now.
Yeah, we have. That's the reason we have to be a bit cautious is there's a press conference on the 26th of March where we're announcing some of the names, and they want to not have within the Brazilian media at least to not have it exposed. So we have to be a bit cautious. So we've been giving some names, and we'll be giving about 30 names I think during that press conference, and then other names at different times. But we need to not announce it because of the press strategy. We think it's a bit silly, but it's what we're faced with.
Another artist, Denica Dakic, Bosnian artist living in Germany. I think this is what we can say up to now.
How many of them are from Brazil?
I think we didn't finish the process of choosing, so but I think we will have more than. I think Latin America, it would be more than 35%. Or, we need to see where we end in because the relations are changing.
Are you
but
blind to a percentage? Or it's
no, it's up to us, but it was a decision that we are traveling quite a lot and quite intensively in Brazil and outside of Brazil, like the neighbor countries. So I think it will be a quite big local presentation in the Biennale, I think bigger than in the past. Statistic. Okay. תודה רבה.
תודה.